Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rebecca Wayland. I am joined by Sora. She is a contract specialist or former contract specialist, and she's here today to give you some great insight into what happens behind the scenes when you turn in your proposal, what the evaluators are really thinking, how they're selected, just kind of give you that sneak peek so that you have a little bit of context for your next proposal or about the process in general. So some things we're going to go run through today. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself and about Sora. Sora is going to talk to you about the government players and evaluators as part of these proposal submissions, and then we'll take your questions. We do have some pre-prepared topics that we want to talk through and some frequently asked questions that we at Trident get a lot. So we're going to cover those areas, and then at the end, we will open up the floor. So anything that you want to chat about that comes up along the way, we're happy to circle back on those topics or field questions if they are new. So without any further ado, I already mentioned I am Rebecca Wayland. I am Trident's GWAC expert, so I lead the Polaris and Oasis Plus campaigns. You may have seen me on other webinars. You've probably seen some of the material we've been pushing out about that. I have a background in proposal management. After I left the Navy, I came to Trident to work, and I've been doing proposal management, proposal writing, and then some research and capture support as well for about the last 9 years. I am also a co-author of Fast Prop, which is our book all about responding to RFPs efficiently and effectively. If you're somebody that is new to the game, or if you are working in a resource-constrained environment, this is a great handbook that breaks down what you need to do, what you don't need to do, some templates to follow, some easy user-friendly checklists, just to kind of keep your life on track during what can be a very hectic 30 days or longer or shorter, depending on the opportunity you're responding to. But we've got a good system to keep you on track and kind of keep your head in the game. So do check that out on Amazon. I'm actually going to turn the floor over to Sora to introduce herself and tell you a little bit about her background. And I think you'll be able to tell why we've invited her today and why we're so excited to talk to her. So Sora, over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. My name is Sora Jung. I joined at Trident as a contracts and pricing consultant in October of last year, 2022. Before that, I was a contract specialist at a sub-agency of Department of Commerce, where my portfolio was mostly IT procurement, so anywhere between hardware, software, and services. And prior to federal service, I spent about 7-8 years on the industry side, doing mostly business development, so doing pricing and writing proposals. So I do have a taste of both sides and what it's like to be on either side of actually writing the proposals and then having to evaluate them. So this slide is a very basic overview. A seasoned contracting professionals will know what, this may seem very basic, but it would be nice just to step back from writing our proposals and see where that falls into this larger timeline of an acquisition. So to start off, we have the pre-solicitation release. So this part is anywhere from acquisition planning, which all agencies must perform acquisition planning and market research for all acquisitions that are negotiated. So anything besides sealed bidding, agencies are required to perform some sort of some sort of planning that is relevant or that is scalable based on the complexity of the requirement. So during that phase, you have to create the acquisition team. It can be an integrated product team. And then you develop the source selection plan, which is basically the evaluation plan. How will the evaluators plan to grade or score the acquisition or the proposal? I think one note that I like to point out here that a great contracting officer, I'll shorten it to KO, taught me is that there's actually written in the FAR that in an acquisition team, they're free that members of the team should not feel prohibited to execute an innovative acquisition plan as long as it's not strictly prohibited in the FAR or if there's any executive order. If there's nothing written in place like a law that doesn't prohibit a method of acquisition, the acquisition team, and specifically the KO, is at the liberty to exercise any sort of plan or business process innovation. And as long as the business decisions are sound, it's in FAR 1.102. So I think that is something that I like to point out, and that KOs are constantly reminded by their head of contracting office or by other CEOs that they are at the liberty to do this. So they are not. So I think a culture change is that they are allowed to make more innovative procedures because the FAR does allow. And I think that sometimes gets hidden because we're all worried about protests. But I think that is something that both the industry and the contracting office should know.
I think that's a really interesting point, Sora, because it probably explains why you'll see some very agency-specific behaviors sometimes. Because somebody will try something out and then they like it, and then it kind of perpetuates. But it's also, like you said, really helpful for industry to know, because they can go in with some creative solutions during the capture planning, right? Or when they're having conversations about what to do about certain things, and make suggestions that are totally fair and totally legal. If the KO shop has the confidence to kind of execute it, and if they've seen it work successfully somewhere else. So that's a really good point. I'm sorry, I will turn it back over to you and stop interrupting.
No. And it's written out in the FAR, so it does say that the KOs are that they should take the lead in making these new innovative processes. So on the industry side, you can sort of encourage them that in the FAR they are allowed to do this. And so, but on the government side, we are always worried about a protest and everything being delayed. But that is something written in the FAR that we have to remind ourselves. So government players, who do we think are involved in addition to evaluators? When I was on the industry side, when I thought of evaluators, I only thought of the technical evaluators. I didn't really know the various players involved until I actually became a contract specialist, and I saw, wow, there's a whole slew of people that I didn't know even really existed. I knew about cost and pricing analysts because they always checked my pricing volume, but I wasn't sure of all the other people involved. So if we go into the next slide, we'll see a snapshot of who's involved. So for larger acquisitions, an integrated product team will be involved in IPT, which means it's whoever has an expertise and needs to be involved in the decision will be part of the evaluation team. You might not see them, and they're not at the forefront, but they're there in the background making some decisions. So if we look on the left, item picture, the program office and the contracting office, they have the biggest circles because they're the most involved. Program office they're actually considered the customers of the contracting office, but these are the division heads or program offices that will be using the requirement at the end. And the contracting office they're the vehicle that will buy it. But you have some legal counsel who will be involved. They might be involved in the pre-solicitation, making sure that we're doing it the right way, that they also put their input. There's Office of Finance, where the funding actually comes from. They will release the funds. An auditor, if the agency went through an auditing session beforehand, the results or the recommendations of the auditor will be heavily in the forefront of everyone's mind, especially the contracting office, making sure that they are doing it correctly this time. Or if there are any tweaks to be made, they want to make sure that anything recommended by the auditor is being implemented. We have non-government advisors. So this can be actually contracted firms that are coming in and helping with large acquisitions. For large acquisitions, I've seen them pretty often. They'll sign an NDA, and usually in the solicitation, it will be noted that non-government advisors are part of the acquisition. Sometimes if the contracting shop at an agency is just inundated, they'll outsource it out to assisted acquisitions. So like FedSim, they're the consultants of the government world. They'll take a certain acquisition of certain dollar value. If it's very complex, they tend to take only very large, high dollar value acquisitions. And then when we look over to the right side, you'll see that there's a I broke it up a little bit just to show you who else might be involved. So if we look at business unit leader director, they might be assigning the evaluators and saying, hey, maybe you should be part of an evaluation panel. They might be the evaluation team chair, which is the lead of an tech evaluator. It might be a team of 2, 3, 5. It can be 9, but there's always a team chair to sort of herd the group. There's a program manager that might be involved as an evaluator or could be just an advisor on the sidelines, talking about past experiences. Then you have the core, a quality assurance specialist, an end user rep, and a property administrator. They all might be part of this evaluation team. You just might not know it. And if we go over to bottom where the orange is, that's sort of a snapshot of the contracting office. There's the head of the contracting office or the source selection authority. Usually they're not the ones making the final decisions for like a medium-sized, say, task order or an acquisition. But the larger the acquisition, the more that they'll be involved, and they might be the actual signing person to make sure, allowing the acquisition to be executed. Usually it's the contracting office. Again, they may or may not have business advisors that are within the government or outside. They might have a management consultant come in and help them through. There's a contracting specialist that does most of the legwork with the contracting officer. So a contracting officer will mostly have at least 3 or a couple of CSs underneath them. And each CS is working on an acquisition. And so a contracting officer may have like 12 on their hands, but the CS will know the specific ones, the ins and outs. You have a cost and pricing analyst. Again, that depends on the agency. If they're a bigger shop, they'll probably have it. If they don't, then it's mostly that work is delegated to the CS and the KO. And then SBS stands for Small Business Specialist. So they're the ones really advocating for the small businesses. They'll usually have a list and the list of their capabilities. So we'll talk about this later, but if you go to an industry day, make sure you look for the SBS or Small Business Liaison and get your name to them and make sure they know your email and just your capabilities, because they're the ones that will most likely remember who you are rather than the KO.
And Sora, the first time you showed me this diagram, I don't know if I felt more or less reassured about the process, because there's so many people or so many stakeholders rather that might touch this acquisition and have a vested interest in making sure that it gets done right. And so on the one hand, that's fantastic because there's some safety checks, right? Some backstops. But it also probably explains sometimes why there's changes or delays or surprises, just because everything's got to be above board with all these different standards and stakeholders. And then, from the industry side, realistically, you're probably only really engaging with maybe the program office, if you're in there, and then the contracting office, prior to the solicitation coming out. So you have a few spheres of influence, but there's just a lot going on to get these things structured and competed correctly so that they get awarded in the right way. So really, I love this slide, but like I said, it makes me nervous and confident at the same time because of the everything that's happening behind me.
And if you're wondering, where's my, you submitted your proposal and you're wondering, what's going on, it's because there's discussions going on with all these different groups and they all have to come to a consensus. So if you're wondering what is going on, discussions are taking place between all these different groups. They have their own meetings. We have a combined meetings. So that's most likely where it's stuck at.
Yeah. Awesome. So we do have some kind of pre-canned questions that we wanted to make sure we talked through today, but I am keeping an eye on chat. So if there are anything, if anything pops up in your mind that you want to talk through as we're going through this, just pop it in there. But yeah, Sora, and maybe you can tell I was listening to the Hamilton soundtrack when I was going through things that I wanted to ask you, but tell us a little bit about proposal grading and what it's like to be in the room when this is happening, and what the vibe is, what some things that you've seen, just what's the overall process kind of like? It's a big question. Sorry, but
right, yeah. There's so many aspects to this, but coming from the industry side, what I was most surprised at was that the technical evaluators aren't the ones facilitating the discussions. Usually, it's the contracting officer (KO), really making sure that everyone's on the same page as they start the discussions. Reassuring, reminding them that these are the Section M, and this is how they will evaluate. The CO or the CS or some sort of representation from the contracting office is at the evaluation, making sure things are done according to the source selection plan and according to Section M. I think this might be a bit of hard news for the industry, is that the evaluators aren't, if you're lucky, you'll get seasoned evaluators. Most likely you won't. And they'll be taught by the KO or by the CES on how evaluations or how acquisitions in general work. They're taught at every step of the way. So you think that, so don't assume that all evaluators are seasoned and that they know what's going on and that they are aware of what proposals usually look like. That's most likely not the case. You teach them along the way. The contracting office holds them along each step and reminds them this is how things are supposed to happen. Usually that's because it's like a firm trying to find proposal writers. It's the same thing on the government side. They're trying to find evaluators. This is their job on top of the regular, 9-to-5 responsibilities. So sometimes it's not easy to find, the technical personnel who've done this in the past and to have them redo it. It's really hard. It's the same thing as trying to find proposal writers. Someone might be on leave, or they're just so swamped, or they want to give a government employee maybe a new chance to learn a skill. So just keep that audience in mind. And you have to write the proposal thinking that, they might not be very aware of an acquisition, of what a proposal might look like. So you have to make it easier to comprehend, because they also might be reading 10 plus proposals. So you have to somehow distinguish yourself simply, but also very much to the point, because evaluators are inundated and they might not be quite aware. But I think, I guess the vibe is that KO sits everyone down and does facilitate. So it's really a heavy joint effort between the program office and the contracting office.
Yeah, and I love what you said there, Sora, about, kind of bringing it back to, if you're on the proposal side, like, what does that mean for you? You have to cater. Sometimes we talk about the lazy grader, right, and making things really easy for them, but really it's a case of catering to the novice grader that may not have seen a lot of proposals and knows that it should track with Section M, but isn't going to, necessarily have the context or the background to take in the whole proposal comprehensively. Like, they might be looking at very specific sections because they're not the technical expert, they're not the process expert, and you've got to make sure that they can still find your information in a way that's really clear and concise and compelling. So that's a really good kind of anchor to keep in your mind if you're writing proposals is, yes, talk to your audience. Absolutely. Talk to the people that are invested in the program and, have high stakes here, but also don't make sure you're leaving anybody behind, because they have to come to that consensus in order to make the award, right? It can't be like, well, two votes over here and this one thought it was okay. Like, no, they're having real conversations about things that stick out to them, whether they're good or bad. And so at the end of the day, everybody has to agree on, the rating and the ranking for this thing to happen. So, yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about with that, or you want to move on to question 2?
Yeah, I'll just add on. So your KO will most likely not be your technical expert, but he or she will have to lead these group of evaluators. So also know that your KO is probably not your technical expert, but they're trying their best just to kind of lead this conversation amongst evaluators that may or may not know about the acquisitions process. So it's really, everyone doesn't know 100% of everything, but it's a joint effort. No one knows 100%, but what they know, they have to contribute as much as they can.
Good points. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this one's a little bit more of a, assembly question, but do I really need to put an acronym list into every volume?
Yes, because evaluators really only might be assigned to one volume, and then so your technical approach will be reviewed by one evaluator, and your past performance or your management approach might be that volume might be reviewed by another evaluator. So if that like past experience doesn't have an acronym list, then the evaluators won't know what you're talking about. So volumes are usually separated if they're larger efforts, so that it just gives people so that no one evaluator is inundated with all the volumes. So they are separated. And so you would want to make sure that an acronym list is in every volume.
And kind of to that point too, you want to make sure that, if you can't necessarily rely on saying, oh, well, we talked about this in the tech section, so they're going to understand that over here in management. Like it depends on obviously the volume organization, but in terms of your actual messaging and solutioning as well. Putting content in the place where it's actually going to get reviewed and graded is really, really important. So, we kind of use the acronym list as a funny example, but the point remains is that if they take your proposal and they literally divide it up into different sections and give everybody a different section, that means not everybody's reviewing the same material. So, really important to make your points often and where they need to be to get graded. Okay, so some common mistakes. I'd love to hear you talk about this, where, common mistakes or incorrect assumptions that bidders have, right? So people like me from industry, when we turn in a proposal, we have all these thoughts about what's going to happen or, what's going on the contracting side. So what have you seen just throw people off, or what do you see happen time and again?
Sure. So we elaborated on this on the other two questions, but it's really number one is don't assume that that all of your proposal will be read by one person. It will be divided. So you might have an overflowing story between your management approach and your technical approach, but because that's separated, for larger efforts, it will most definitely be separated. It will be different evaluators. For a smaller effort, like the one or two evaluators might read the whole thing, but anything that's a little bit larger, it will be separated. So if you had a story that starts with your technical approach and you wanted to elaborate it in your management experience or other volumes, they'll only read half of it because it's separated. So I think that was a news to me when I joined the government, is that, we divided it out. And the technical evaluators do not see the price until they've completed the technical evaluation, because we don't want to taint them with the price and who costs less. They do not know anything about the price until the technical evaluation is completed. And that pricing is, the analysis is done by the KO and the CS, maybe a cost and price analyst if they have one. But price is not at evaluators really want to know how much it costs while they're evaluating, but they do not know until the very end. And one mistake is compliance reviews. You might think, the KO or the CS might understand that maybe I have one sentence that goes onto one more page and they'll be fine, or the formatting. They'll understand why it's like this, just assuming that we might know. But usually for larger efforts, we assign compliance reviews to interns or someone else who might have free time to help us with the compliance review, because that's the first step where we chop off proposals. We say, okay, we have so many proposals to review. Compliance review is the gate. Well, you either make it or you don't. And we don't see them. And the person that's doing the compliance review, they're given a checklist to review. Does it meet this many pages? Does it have this many volumes? The very basic compliance items. So they're not going to know who you are, why it's this way. They're just going to look at your proposal, at the checklist. Oh, it didn't meet it. Okay, well, we chop off that page or you're disqualified. And so, don't assume, the KO or the CS will have wiggle room to understand why you did it a certain way that's not in the RFP. Someone else might do it, and it's really the best way for government to not have to review a proposal.
Okay. And then we talk a lot, at least on the proposal teams, about what questions we want to ask and how we should word them, and what what's going to get us the answer we want. So is there anything that sticks out around asking questions, or even really engaging with the government, that stands out as particularly effective, or that you would recommend as a best practice?
Yep, just short and simple and direct, because evaluators, they get confused too on the industry questions, and we get like 100 plus. So just keep it short and simple, and really to the point. Don't long-winded questions. It gets muddled. They're trying to figure out what you're trying to get at. We also second guess, and we try to figure out, what are they trying to ask? Are they trying to get at this? Are they trying to ask about the incumbent? So just short and simple, right to the point, and don't point out, oh yeah, grammar mistakes. That doesn't earn anyone brownie points. So short and simple. Don't try to confuse the evaluators.
So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, and we're going to elaborate on that point, because totally concur on not calling out grammatical mistakes. What about I have two questions. What about if there's confusion around like how things should be assembled and submitted? Right, because I know sometimes it's like, there's conflicting page counts, or it's not clear, like if there's an attachment, how that should be submitted, if it's going in as an attachment or embedded in a document. Is it worth asking questions about those things? And then what if you're past the deadline, but you have a question like that? What do you do? Do you ask it anyway? Do you just do your best? Like, what's the best approach? Because deadlines pass sometimes, and we don't catch that we're having a question about that until it's go time, right? So, yeah.
I would say definitely ask the question if there are any inconsistencies in the instructions on how to submit things, or if there's not enough instructions. I would say definitely ask about that. And if it's past the deadline, still ask. So if you're past the deadline, technically we don't have to answer it. But if it's a legitimate question that needs to be answered, they will answer it, just maybe a little bit later. But the government will answer it. I would still say it's worth submitting that question, even if it's past the question due date.
Makes sense, because probably in answering the question, the government can save themselves some headaches too.
Oh yeah.
Okay, awesome. So this is something you'd mentioned earlier with the market research, and how an opportunity gets competed, whether it's a set aside or whether it goes simplified acquisition. So can you just talk a little bit more about what the process that is there, and like how, like if you're talking about market research, like just general characteristics of what that entails or how involved that is?
I would recommend you to read FAR Part 10. It's kind of short compared to the rest of the FAR, and it lines out what the market research should show and some techniques. And so you'll just get an idea of what the government side will do, because we do make sure that it's, our market research results and what the FAR is requiring us to do. But in essence, in time of execution, the program office really starts the market research first, because they know the requirement. They'll take the first stab at it. They'll develop, each agency will have some sort of template, and they'll take a stab at it first, trying to figure out, what's on the market. Can we buy it from the commercial marketplace? They'll do that for legwork, and then they'll submit it to the contracting office. And from there, we'll figure out, okay, what kind of IDIQs, what kind of BPAs are out there. The program office might not know about those, I guess, more contracting vehicles. They might not know about that, or what we've done in the past. So they'll then shift it over to the contracting office. And then from there, it's really a teamwork of figuring out, okay, this is, the technical requirements, but we know how to buy it, and it's a joint effort. But really, it's your program office that does it first. So it's a joint effort. But this is where, during the market research, you'll see in the FAR that this is when the government can reach out to the industry and try to get some more information. And I know we have a different question about RFIs and sources sought, and that's all part of market research.
Yeah, and that's actually probably a good segue because we do get asked this question a lot where we'll see an RFI pop out or sources sought and they'll say, hey, we just, we're doing market research and we want to know about these things. And your incumbent, for consulting them, they might say like, I'm real busy. Like they already know who we are. We already have a contract. What's the point in responding to this? So if you've had any kind of sage words of advice around why these might be worth your time, or if they're not, like, right, if agencies just do them because it's a check in the block, like what weight do they actually carry, and how much priority should they get when you're a company and you're responding to things all the time, always? How important are these?
From my experience, RFIs and sources are still quite a workload, even for the government side. So we're not. We do want this information. We put in this work because we do need the information as part of our market research or part of what the heck we're supposed to do, or what is industry doing. So if you are interested, if this is something that's in your wheelhouse, that requirement, then I would say definitely respond, because this is when you suggest the NAICS code, PSC codes that are relevant to you or beneficial, and you can start really shaping the RFP and maybe even the requirements. You tell us what you know and tell us what's possible, what's not possible. Contracting officers may try, if you propose a solution that meets our requirements, we might go with that. If you submit to an RFI or sources sought, a KO can just send out an RFP among those responders, and that might make it easier for the contracting office side. So I would say if that's in your line of business, definitely go ahead and respond, and because that's also part of our market research. So it is important to the government side as well.
Yeah, and I feel very validated because I've definitely told clients that, like, look, if the government bothered to put this out, then they're going to take the time to review it, and you want to have a response in that pile. And that's interesting too. So one question, this might be a technical question. I could probably just look it up on the FAR, but if you know it, great. Do they have to? Do the contracting officers have to notify industry if they're going to use a respondent? I'm asking this in a confusing way, but if they do intend to limit RFP distribution to only those who reply to the sources sought or the RFIs, do they have to notify bidders of that at the time of the RFP and sources sought release?
Yes, So I think that might depend on how the KO or the agent, the contracting office might do it, and it depends on if you're going to do just to small businesses, and then you have to get this, small business SBA involved. But the last time I did it, we were very clear in our sources sought and RFI that only who bid will receive the RFP, and I believe that. Don't quote me, but I believe that is something that you would have to write in the RFP or sources sought.
That tracks with my experience as well. So it would make sense if it was a requirement because anytime you limit competition, I feel like you got to give people a heads up. And a question from Jerry was, does the government use input from that draft RFP to improve their own final RFP? How much influence does your RFI have, or your sources sought information that you respond with have on the government's final solicitation?
I think it has a heavy influence, because if the government's putting out an RFI or sources sought, they're sort of in the dark. They're not really sure what's going on. So they really need the RFI and sources sought to give them a direction to go to.
Thank you for that question, Jerry. Okay, how are evaluators selected? I know you kind of talked about this a little bit in terms of the, might be the novice, might be somebody who's looking for a feather in their cap for their professional, skill development. But yeah, I'll turn this one over to you.
Ideally, the program manager will be involved, or whoever the head of program office will say, hey, this person has done this before. Let's have this evaluator do it again. But according to the FAR, really the source selection authority, KO, the contracting officer, is designated as the source selection authority, and they'll establish the evaluation team, but they don't know exactly who in the program office can do a technical evaluation. So the program office says, hey, what about there's these people, and then they'll give a bunch of names and they'll figure out who has the time, and mostly who has the time to do it. It's really whoever has the time and wants to sort of do it. And you hope that these people have done it, have evaluated in the past, or they, usually it's definitely someone that is aware of the requirement. You're not going to get someone who is so, who doesn't know anything about it. You'll get someone from the relevant program office to do it. It just depends on how skilled are they in evaluating. Again, like I said before, it's like find proposal writers who has the time and who has the capability of doing it.
Okay, so this is a really good question, number 8 here. How important is it to attend the industry days, either virtually or in person? We've seen a blend now, right, with COVID and just operating in 2023. So if you're interested in a bid, how important is it to go?
I would say it's very important to go. We on the government side, we're also encouraged to attend. So, and to meet and greet and just to talk about what's out there. So I would say it'll be very beneficial to go and to these and attend these industry days, especially if you're a small business, because a small business specialist or small business liaison will be attending, and they usually have a list of firms and what they're capable of. So you would really want to get to know them. They're like the number one person you should meet at industry days. Forget the KO or the head of contracting office. The small business liaison will really be the person that you would want to meet on the industry side. From my experience, we had our small business specialist send us they'll send an email to the KOs and the CSs, a list of firms and their capabilities, maybe once a month, just to make sure that we're reminded that there are these small businesses that have attended, and that just to keep them on our radar as we're working on all sorts of acquisitions. So I'm guessing that will happen in other agencies. And then in your intranet, there'll be a list of small businesses and what's in their wheelhouse. So it'll be great to meet them and make sure you're somehow on the radar. And you kind of want to meet your KO and see what their temperaments are, because they have the leverage to interpret the FAR if there are any ambiguity. So it might be helpful just to figure out, who the KO, if you see a KO on an RFP, just getting a sense of who they are, it just might be helpful for you.
Okay. And then, Jerry asked the question of how much weight, what's the weighting difference between Section L and Section M, when it comes to the grading? Can you talk a little about the interplay of those sections?
Well, you have to, definitely make sure you submit it on time and all of that. And, you have your proposal sections the way that it's laid out. Because that's the compliance review. If you don't make it through a compliance review, you're kind of stuck. So make sure you do as it said in Section L. But again, Section M is so the KO will rip out the Section M, we'll have it with us during evaluation. So we will evaluate per Section M. So that is, if you don't do it according to Section M, then it's an invalid acquisition. So we do always make sure to have Section M with us as we go through each evaluation. So it's a cop-out answer, but yes, you have to make sure that you abide by both Section L and M.
Yeah, no, and I think the way you described it, Sora, was helpful, right, with the phases, right? So if the first thing you have to do is make it through the gate review and make sure you have all the right sections turned in on time, that's Section L all day long, right? And then when it comes to what standard is going to be applied, what are they defining as low risk, or what's the government going to look at for, to quantify successful performance or something, then making it through that first gate and then, to that second gate where they can then start to say, okay, well, now on this spectrum, you're kind of in here, I think is important advice. So, okay, awesome. And then I think we might have a couple more. Nope, we'll take any other questions from the team now. That was our pre-canned list. So, anything else that anyone's curious about, or that you want to spend some time talking through? I'm going to wait just a second to see if we see anybody typing. So what if I'm sorry, I'll put you on the spot. Sorry. So this is a question that we get sometimes where, a contracting shop will put out an RFI or sources sought, and they'll say that they're specifically interested in small businesses, but the response won't be limited to only small businesses. If you're a large business and you don't want this to go small business, should you respond and list reasons that it shouldn't, or, is it helpful? I know it's, point out reasons why it shouldn't go to a small business, assuming it's legitimate, right? We're not trying to kill small businesses here. From a competitive standpoint in government contracts, like because we have some large businesses that are like, nah, it's too late. Like if it's an RFI for small businesses, then they're already thinking about doing it and they're just looking for the justification. So is there anything to talk about there just with large businesses responding to sources sought?
If you know that small businesses can't do it, if they need to partner, I think you would, and there's a strong business case for it, then I would say definitely let us know. I think we're always interested in small business. We have metrics to, meet. We need to meet certain goals of, with the various kinds of small businesses. But if you don't think a small business can satisfactory, it cannot meet the requirements in a satisfactory manner, then you should let us know that small businesses can have the capabilities, but most likely they will need to partner with a large business. And then we'll develop the RFP in a way where we'll ask for maybe a small business prime and then, they can sub, or there'll be ways we can shape the RFP, but that would be really great for the government to know as well.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. We have those conversations a lot. Is it even worth the time? And, it sounds like in a lot of cases, the government would have the flexibility is if there's certain things that the small business can do, then, looking at these avenues like you talked about, where either you say it's going to be a small business prime, but the teaming options are open, or maybe part of the acquisition gets competed in a certain way just based on how services can bundle or what acquisition pathways exist. Okay, so here's a good question. Do most RFPs emphasize writing in, quote, good English?
Do RFPs? So are you asking if the RFPs?
Are you wanting to know if the response needs to be well written? Is that,
or if the RFP should be written in good English? Because I know RFPs are copy and paste, so that's why they're not in good English. Proposal in good English. Okay. I would say more direct English. So if direct's good, then I would say don't make it too complicated. We don't want to find grammatical mistakes in your proposals. Syntax should be simpler, but you don't need to have a PhD in English to write a good RFP. We just want something that's very clear. Again, evaluators are reading 10 plus proposals, so you do want something that just stands out and is direct, but also without. So I wouldn't worry too much about perfecting a sentence, just making sure it's short and to the point.
Yeah, keeping that content digestible is, I think, super important. And again, validated by the fact that if they're not looking at price until they've already read your proposal and kind of got the vibe of what you're proposing, you want to have as many sticking points in their head when they see the price that they go, oh, that's reasonable, or oh, that's a great value. Like that's the best value, in fact, of the proposal submitted. Okay. So this is a good one from Morgan. So what are some reasons as to why the government might extend a proposal deadline?
Oh, that's a good question. So it can be a number of things. One, maybe your questions or your industry input to a draft RFP, or your questions really make us question on the government side, are these requirements legitimate? Should we separate the requirements to maybe two separate things? Are we really doing this the right way? We do go into a point where maybe we're not doing this correctly, and so we have to reevaluate our whole acquisition plan. That might be so. That could be one. I think that might be the major one, is where we're really now reevaluating our stance on the acquisition. Two, maybe funding isn't quite there yet. With some agencies, they have to fund before an acquisition can be released or an RFP can be released. So maybe there's some issues with the funding. Maybe it can be a whole, there's so many reasons. Maybe the evaluators are timelines, just someone's on vacation, someone's not available. Maybe the KO is away. There can be so many reasons, maybe minor reason, not too minor, because I think that really pushes your timeline to the right, and we don't want to do that. But I would say the biggest reason a proposal can be pushed significantly is if everyone's evaluating, is this the right way? Have we done something wrong? Do we need, the head of contracting office to be part of it? Do we need to break down the acquisition? So I would say there are multiple reasons. And I would say, government questioning themselves isn't out of the picture. That could be a significant reason why.
Makes sense. Okay. Any other questions out there? We got about 12 minutes left in our scheduled session, but don't want to shoo anybody away if there's more questions that you want to talk about, because this is a really, really great opportunity to pick Sora's brain. She's got some great experience and perspectives. I don't see anybody else typing. We must have answered all of their questions, Sora. So good job. Nobody has any other questions about government acquisitions and what happens behind the scenes. So.
I know there's so many as well. So if one pops up, you can feel free to email me. My email's on the slide. So if anything pops up in the future.
Wow. Awesome. Okay. Well, guys and gals, thanks so much for dialing in. Sora, thank you for your time and sharing your experience and perspectives with us. Really appreciate that. And yeah, she's just one of our fantastic SMEs that we have at Trident. So we would love to get in touch with you all. If you have questions after this, like Sora said, send us an email. We'll get it answered. We love to talk through these things and just educate both sides about, what's happening, what's not happening, what ought to happen, so that your next proposal can be more civilized, less eventful, and hopefully a winning bid. So thanks so much for your time today, and we hope to talk with you soon. Have a great day.
Bye.